Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The checkpoint sat at the edge of a dense spruce forest, where the Quebec-Ontario line cut through terrain so thick you couldn't see 20 meters into the trees. Laurent Duplessis had worked this post for 6 years, and he knew the rhythm of traffic here. The logging trucks before dawn, the occasional lost tourist, the regularity of silence between midnight and 4. Tonight felt different from the moment his shift started. The air had that peculiar stillness that comes before snow, though the forecast promised clear skies. Laurent adjusted the heater in the booth and checked the logbook, running his finger down the neat columns of vehicle descriptions, license plates, timestamps. Everything accounted for, everything normal. At 1:47 a.m., he stepped outside to walk the perimeter. The cold hit his face like a slap, sharper than it should have been for October. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty roadway that stretched into Quebec, the faded yellow line disappearing into the tree line. He checked the tire detection strips embedded in the pavement, the sensors that would alert him to any approaching vehicle. All quiet, all still. Laurent walked the fence line, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The forest pressed close on both sides, a wall of black punctuated by the occasional gleam of his flashlight on bark. He'd almost completed his circuit when he noticed the tire tracks. Fresh ones, deep treads pressed into the soft shoulder. He crouched down, examining them with his flashlight. The tracks came from the Quebec side, ran straight to the checkpoint, then stopped. Just ended, right there at the detection strip. No corresponding tracks on the Ontario side. No record of any vehicle passing through. Laurent stood up slowly, scanning the darkness. A logging truck rumbled past on the main road, and Maeve Kavanagh leaned out her window as she pulled up to the booth. She'd been running this route for 15 years, always friendly, always punctual. "Cold one tonight, Laurent," she said, handing over her manifest. "You see any vehicles on your way in?" he asked, checking her paperwork without really looking at it. "Last 20 minutes or so?" Maeve frowned. "Not a soul. Road's been dead since I left Rouyn-Noranda. Why?" "Just checking." He handed back her documents and waved her through. But as her truck disappeared down the Ontario road, Laurent returned to the tire tracks. He followed them backward, into Quebec territory, his boots crunching on gravel. The tracks were consistent, clear. A heavy vehicle, probably a van or small truck. Then they vanished. Not gradually, not fading into harder ground. They simply stopped existing, as if the vehicle had been lifted straight up into the air. Laurent stood at the point where the last clear treadmark ended, and there was nothing beyond it. No disturbance in the dirt, no indication a vehicle had ever been there. He radioed the main station. "Yeah, Laurent?" The night dispatcher sounded half asleep. "I've got something strange here. Tire tracks coming from Quebec side, but no record of passage and they just stop." A pause. "Stop? End. Middle of the road. No vehicle ever came through my checkpoint, but the tracks lead right to it. You check the logbook?" 3 times, nothing. Could be from earlier in the day. They're fresh. I can still smell rubber. Another pause, longer this time. "Want me to send someone?" Laurent looked back at the checkpoint, its lights warm and inviting against the surrounding darkness. Then he looked at where the tracks ended, a perfect termination point that made no sense. "No," he said finally. "I'll keep monitoring." But for the rest of his shift, Laurent couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed through. Something that didn't want to be recorded. At 3:15 a.m., his radio crackled with a call from Nolan Petrie, the caretaker at the provincial park about 15 kilometers into Ontario. Nolan sounded rattled. "Laurent, you on duty tonight?" "Yeah, Nolan. What's wrong?" "Did you let anyone through in the last hour, heading east?" Laurent's grip tightened on the radio. "Negative, why? I've got fresh tire tracks all over the main parking area. Deep ones, like someone was doing circles. But I've been here since midnight and I haven't seen a single vehicle. Gates have been locked." Laurent felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of tracks? Van, maybe, or small truck, heavy load by the look of it. The same tracks, they'd reappeared kilometers away on the wrong side of the border. "Nolan, lock yourself in the office, I'm calling this in." But when the main patrol arrived an hour later, both sets of tracks had faded. Not washed away by rain or covered by snow, just lighter, fainter, as if whatever made them was slowly being erased from the world. The senior officer, a woman named Brisbois, who'd worked the border for 20 years, walked the perimeter with Laurent as dawn broke. She examined where the tracks had been, now barely visible depressions in the earth. "You're sure about what you saw?" she asked. "I photographed them," Laurent said, pulling out his phone. But when he opened his camera roll, the photos showed only empty road. Clear, perfect asphalt with no tire marks at all. He scrolled through frantically, but every image was the same. "I took 6 photos," he said, his voice hollow. "They were right there." Brisbois gave him a long look. "You've been working nights for 6 years, Laurent. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. Nolan saw them too, at the park. Nolan called in sick this morning," Brisbois said quietly. "Said he needed a few days." Laurent drove home as the sun rose, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind wouldn't settle. The photos had been there. He'd watched the shutter click, seen the images appear on his screen. He pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment, engine idling. That's when he noticed his odometer. When he'd left for work last night, it had read 847,392 kilometers. Now it showed 847,377, 15 kilometers less than when he'd started his shift. As if the distance he'd driven simply hadn't happened. Laurent turned off the engine and went inside. He didn't go back to work for 3 days. When he finally returned, there was a note in the logbook, written in handwriting he didn't recognize, dated the night of his shift. It read, 2:14 a.m., white cargo van, Quebec plates, waved through, routine check. But Laurent had been alone that night, he was certain of it. He flipped back through previous entries, checking the handwriting. It matched his own perfectly. Same loops on the G, same slant to the numbers, but he had no memory of writing it. No memory of any white van. That night, Maeve came through again on her regular route. "Hey, Laurent," she said, leaning out her window. "You figure out what that van was doing?" Laurent's blood went cold. "What van?" "The white one. From a couple nights ago. You were checking it when I came through, remember? Took you a while. I had to wait." "Maeve, you pulled right up. I checked your papers and waved you through in less than a minute." She frowned. "No, you were at the back of a white cargo van. Had the doors open, looking inside with your flashlight. I sat here for maybe 10 minutes while you searched it. What did the driver look like? Didn't see one. Figured they were in the booth with you." Laurent felt his mouth go dry. "And you saw me wave the van through?" "Yeah, it headed into Ontario about 2 minutes before you cleared me. But there was no record. No entry. No memory." That weekend, Laurent drove to the provincial park. Nolan was there, looking haggard and older than his 53 years. They sat in the parking lot watching families unload camping gear, normal and safe in the daylight. "I can't explain the tracks," Nolan said finally. "I watched them fade, like someone was erasing them with a giant invisible eraser bit by bit. Started at the edges and worked inward." "Maeve says she saw me check a white van," Laurent said. "Says I spent 10 minutes searching it, but I don't remember any van." Nolan was quiet for a long time, then, "What if it did come through? What if you did check it and something made you forget? Made the cameras forget? Made everything forget except the things it couldn't control, like other people's memories, like tracks in dirt? That's insane." "Is it?" Nolan gestured at the parking area. "I had a dream last night about that van. It was full of something, Laurent. Not drugs, not people, just empty space that was somehow heavy. Space that didn't belong here." Laurent wanted to laugh it off, but he couldn't. Because he'd had the same dream. The white van, doors open, and inside just darkness that pressed outward, darkness that had weight and breath. "I'm putting in for a transfer," Nolan said. "Somewhere inland, somewhere far from the border. They'll think you're crazy." "Maybe I am." Nolan stood up, brushing off his pants. "But I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there somewhere. Probably crossed back already. Probably crosses every night, and we just forget each time." Laurent drove back to the checkpoint that evening for his next shift. As he unlocked the booth, his flashlight beam swept across the ground. There, just for a moment, he saw them. Fresh tire tracks leading from nowhere to nowhere. He blinked, and they were gone. The logbook sat open on the desk, waiting for his first entry of the night. Laurent picked up his pen, then paused. On the previous page, in his own handwriting, was an entry he didn't remember making. 11:47 p.m., white cargo van, routine inspection, no issues, waved through. But last night, he'd had the night off. Laurent looked out at the dark forest, at the road stretching into Quebec, at the border that was supposed to be clear and defined and knowable. Somewhere out there, something was crossing, had been crossing for who knows how long, and every time it passed through, everyone forgot. Everyone except for the small things. The tire tracks that faded too slowly, the photographs that erased themselves, the kilometers that subtracted instead of added, the dreams that leaked through whatever made them forget. Laurent began his shift log. His hand moved across the page, forming words he'd forget writing by morning. Another routine night at the Quebec-Ontario border, nothing to report. But deep in the forest, something heavy rolled along a road that didn't appear on any map, leaving tracks that would be gone by dawn. Lac Mistassini stretched out like a sheet of hammered steel under the gray November sky, its surface choppy with whitecaps that hadn't been there an hour ago. Elsie Redford checked the weather radar on her phone for the third time, watching the red and orange bands spiral toward her position. The storm was coming in faster than predicted. She'd been stationed at this checkpoint for 8 months, monitoring the isolated road that skirted the lake's eastern shore. It was seasonal work. The road closed entirely from December to March when ice made it impassable. Most days she saw maybe a dozen vehicles, fishermen heading to the lodges, supply trucks, the occasional lost tourist who'd taken a wrong turn 50 kilometers back. Today, she'd seen no one. The radio on her dash crackled with static, and she adjusted the frequency. The main station was spotty out here even in good weather. In a storm, communication could drop entirely for hours. "Station 12, this is Central. Do you copy?" "Copy Central. This is Redford." "Storm's escalating. We're closing the northern bridge in 30 minutes. Anyone on your side needs to cross now or hunker down for the night. Elsie looked at her log. Empty since 9 a.m. No one's come through today. I'll secure the checkpoint and wait it out. Copy that. Check in at 2200. The connection dissolved into white noise. Elsie gathered her things from the small booth. Thermos, paperwork, the mystery novel she'd been reading. The station building was 50 meters up the road, a squat concrete structure with a generator and bunks for nights like this. She'd ridden out storms here before, but something about today felt wrong. The wind picked up as she crossed the distance, carrying with it the smell of deep water and something else, something organic and old, like vegetation that had been underwater too long. The lake was invisible now behind sheets of rain that swept across the road in gray curtains. She unlocked the station and stepped inside, shaking water from her jacket. The interior was cold but dry. She flipped the generator switch and lights buzzed to life overhead, harsh fluorescent white against the storm-darkened windows. The radio on the desk crackled. Station 12. Elsie grabbed the handset. This is Redford. Go ahead. Only static answered. She adjusted the dial, running through frequencies. The storm was playing havoc with reception. She was about to give up when a voice emerged from the noise, clear and calm despite the interference. Bridge is compromised. Do not attempt crossing. Copy that, Elsie said. This is Officer Redford at Station 12. Who am I speaking with? North access is flooded. Detour required. The voice had a strange quality to it. Flat and without inflection. Elsie frowned at the radio. Identify yourself, please. Which station are you calling from? Take the service road, 2 kilometers east. Follow the markers. What service road? There's no service road on this route. But the voice continued as if she hadn't spoken. Water is rising. Current route will be impassable by 1800 hours. Use alternate path. Elsie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Listen, I don't know what you're talking about. There is no alternate path. And how do you know my position? The static swelled, then faded. When it cleared, the voice was still there. Todd O'Rourke, Station 12. Do you copy? Elsie's hand tightened on the handset. Todd O'Rourke was the fishing guide who worked the lake, running tourists out to the deep spots. She'd met him a few times. Quiet man, kept to himself, knew the water better than anyone. Todd, is that you? What are you doing on this frequency? 2 kilometers east, service road. Follow the markers before dark. Todd, you're not making sense. Where are you calling from? The line went dead. Elsie stared at the radio, then grabbed her phone. No signal. The storm had killed the cell towers. She was completely cut off except for the radio, and that clearly wasn't reliable. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering against the roof like handfuls of gravel. Thunder rolled across the lake, deep and continuous. She tried the radio again. Central, this is Station 12. Do you copy? Nothing but static. Any station. This is Officer Redford at Station 12. I'm receiving strange communications on this frequency. Please respond. The speaker crackled. Service road, 2 kilometers east. Water is rising. It was the same voice, the same flat, emotionless delivery. But now Elsie wasn't sure it was Todd at all. The cadence was wrong. The words too measured, too mechanical. Who is this? She demanded. Identify yourself immediately. Follow the markers. Station 12. Time is limited. Elsie switched off the radio. Her hands were shaking slightly. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. There was no service road. She'd driven this route 100 times. And even if there was, why would Todd be directing her to it? Why would anyone? She moved to the window and peered out into the storm. The rain was so heavy she could barely see the checkpoint booth. Beyond that, The road disappeared into gray nothing. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape for a brief second. In that moment of brightness, Elsie saw a figure standing beside the booth. Tall, wearing what looked like fishing waders and a heavy coat. Just standing there in the downpour, motionless. Thunder crashed overhead. When her vision cleared from the flash, the figure was gone. Elsie stepped back from the window, her heart hammering. She told herself it was nothing. A trick of the light, the storm playing with shadows. But she'd seen someone. She was sure of it. The radio crackled back to life on its own. The voice returned, but this time there were two of them, speaking in unison. "Service Road, 2 kilometers. Follow the markers. Time is limited. Water is rising. Station 12. Do you copy?" Elsie grabbed the handset. "This is not funny. Who is broadcasting on this frequency?" "Bridge is compromised. Detour required. 2 kilometers east. There is no bridge near here, and no service road." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. She knew this area well, but in 8 months had she explored every side road? Every access point? The lake was huge, with dozens of fishing camps and maintenance trails. Follow the markers before dark. Elsie checked her watch. 5:47 p.m. Sunset was at 6:15, but with the storm it might as well be midnight already. The darkness was closing in fast. She made a decision. She'd drive 2 kilometers east just to check. Prove to herself there was nothing there. Then she'd come back, lock the doors, and wait for the storm to pass. She grabbed her raincoat and flashlight, then paused. On the desk sat the station logbook. She flipped it open to leave a note about where she was going. The last entry stopped her cold. It was dated today. 3:00 p.m. In handwriting she didn't recognize. T. O'Rourke checked in, reporting high water levels, taking service road to North Station. But no one had come through. She'd been at the checkpoint all day, and there was no North Station within 50 kilometers. Elsie's mouth went dry. She flipped back through previous pages. All her entries were there, neat and normal, but scattered among them were others. Same handwriting, same signature. T. O'Rourke. Entries going back weeks, all reporting on water levels, all mentioning the service road, all written on days when she'd seen no one. The radio voices continued their loop. 2 kilometers east, follow the markers, water's rising. Elsie left the logbook open and headed for the door. Rain hit her like a wall when she stepped outside, soaking through her coat in seconds. She ran to her patrol vehicle and climbed in, water streaming from her hair. The engine started on the first try. Small miracle. She pulled onto the road heading east, wipers beating furiously against the downpour. Her headlights barely penetrated 10 meters. The world beyond was just gray chaos. 1 kilometer. Nothing but forest and rain. 2 kilometers, still nothing. She was about to turn back when her headlights caught something. A break in the trees. A gap she'd never noticed before. And at the entrance, a weathered wooden sign. Service road. Authorized vehicles only. Elsie stopped the vehicle, staring at the sign. It looked old. Decades old. Paint peeling. Wood silvered with age. But she'd driven past this spot dozens of times. Hundreds. She would have noticed it. The radio crackled. "Turn here. Follow the markers." Her hands gripped the steering wheel. Every instinct told her to drive away, to get back to the station and lock the doors. But something else pulled at her. Curiosity. The need to understand. She turned onto the service road. The track was narrow, barely wide enough for her vehicle. Trees pressed close on both sides, branches scraping against the doors. The road surface was rough, more mud than gravel, and her vehicle lurched through deep puddles. Every 50 meters she saw them, the markers. orange reflective strips nailed to trees, leading deeper into the forest. The radio had gone silent. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, the trees opened up. Elsie found herself at the edge of the lake, at a small clearing with a dock jutting out into the choppy water. And at the end of the dock sat a boat. Elsie killed the engine and sat in silence, rain drumming on the roof. The boat was a small fishing vessel, maybe 20 feet long, white with blue trim. Even from here she could see water sloshing in the bottom. No one was on the dock. No one was in the boat. But tied to the cleats were fresh ropes, still dripping, and on the dock itself, leading from the boat to the tree line, were wet footprints. Elsie grabbed her flashlight and stepped out into the rain. She approached the dock slowly, hand resting on her service weapon. The footprints were clear despite the rain. Bare feet, adult-sized. The prints were filling with water but hadn't been washed away yet. Fresh. Very fresh. She followed them with her flashlight beam. They led from the boat, across the dock, onto the muddy shore. Then they continued into the forest, not toward the road, deeper into the trees. "Hello," Elsie called out. "Border Services, is anyone here?" Only the rain answered. She walked to the boat and shone her light inside. Water sloshed around empty benches. Fishing rods lay scattered across the bottom. A tackle box had spilled open, lures glinting in her flashlight beam. On the center bench sat a radio, the same make and model as her patrol radio. It was on. The frequency display glowed green in the darkness. Elsie reached for it, then froze. The radio crackled to life. "Station 12. Did you follow the markers?" The voice was coming from right there, from the radio in the boat. But it was impossible. She had the only patrol radio for kilometers. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Water is rising. Time is limited." Elsie backed away from the boat, her light sweeping the clearing. The footprints continued their path into the forest, but now she saw something else. More prints coming from a different direction. Dozens of them. All bare feet. All converging on the dock. All heading into the forest. She ran back to her vehicle and locked the doors, hands shaking as she started the engine. The service road seemed longer on the way back, the trees closer. Twice she thought she saw figures standing among the trunks, pale and still. But when she looked directly at them, there was nothing. She burst back onto the main road and floored it towards the station. The rain was letting up slightly, the worst of the storm passing. But the light was almost gone. Back at the station, Elsie slammed the door behind her and engaged the deadbolt. She was soaked through, shivering. She grabbed a towel from the supply closet and dried her face with trembling hands. The logbook still lay open on the desk, except now there were new entries. Fresh ink, still slightly wet. 6:23 p.m. E. Redford followed markers, arrived at dock, saw the gathering, and below it, in the same unknown handwriting, 6:31 p.m. E. Redford returned. Water level critical. Road will close. Elsie hadn't written either entry. She looked at her watch, 6:31 p.m. exactly. Someone had been writing in the logbook while she was gone, while the station was locked and empty. The radio on the desk sparked to life one more time. "Station 12, thank you for your service." Then came another voice. Todd's voice, but different now. Warmer, more human. "Tell Marin I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to come back." Marin Cloutier was the clerk at the main station. Elsie had met her a few times. Pleasant woman. Widowed, if she remembered right. Husband had drowned in the lake years ago. Fishing accident. His name had been Todd. The radio went silent. This time, Elsie knew it wouldn't come back on. She moved to the window and looked out at the lake, barely visible in the dying light. The water was higher than she'd ever seen it, lapping at the edges of the road. In the distance, she could see the dock she'd just left. And on it, illuminated by a brief flash of lightning, dozens of figures stood in a line, all facing the water, all perfectly still. By the time the thunder reached her, they were gone. The storm passed during the night. By morning, the lake had receded to normal levels. The road was clear. The sun shone through broken clouds like nothing had happened. Elsie drove to the 2-kilometer mark and looked for the service road. There was no gap in the trees, no weathered sign. Just unbroken forest, same as always. She filed her report, leaving out most of what had happened. Equipment malfunction. Strange radio interference. Nothing unusual otherwise. But she photocopied the logbook pages first. The entries in unknown handwriting. The notes about water levels and service roads and gatherings at the dock. When she brought the logbook to the main station, Marin Cloutier was at the front desk. Elsie hesitated, then asked, "Marin, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Your husband, the one who drowned, what was his name?" Marin's expression softened with old grief. Todg O'Rourke. "Why do you ask?" "Did he fish Loch Mistassini?" "All the time. He loved that lake." She smiled sadly. "He always said if he died out there, he'd find a way to help others, to warn them when the water got dangerous. He hated the thought of anyone else drowning like he did." Elsie nodded slowly. "How long ago did it happen?" 12 years. November. During a storm. The same month. The same kind of weather." Elsie thanked her and left. She never worked Station 12 again. Requested a transfer the following week, and it was approved without question. But sometimes, on stormy November nights, she still hears that flat, emotionless voice on her radio at home, even though it's not turned on, even though it's not plugged in. Water is rising. Follow the markers. Time is limited. And she wonders how many others received the same message over the years. How many followed the service road that appeared only when the lake grew hungry? How many made it back? The logbook still sits in evidence storage. New entries appear in it occasionally, according to the clerk who checks it weekly. Always the same handwriting. Always reporting water levels. The ice road stretched ahead like a pale scar across the frozen tundra, disappearing into the gray-white horizon where sky met earth without distinction. Baptiste Tremblay had been driving this route for 3 winters now, and he still couldn't shake the feeling that the land here didn't want people. It tolerated them. Barely. His patrol truck's heater fought a losing battle against the -40 cold seeping through every seal and gap. Outside, nothing moved. No wind, no wildlife. Just the endless white and the groan of ice beneath his tires. The radio crackled. "Patrol 7, this is base. Do you copy?" Baptiste grabbed the handset, grateful for the human voice. "Copy, base. This is Tremblay. We've got a situation. Cargo truck, registry number TN47Y9, should have reached checkpoint Delta 2 hours ago. No sign of them. Last GPS ping puts them on your route, about 40 kilometers north of your position." Baptiste checked his dashboard GPS. The route was a straight line for the next 60 kilometers. Hard to get lost on an ice road. There was literally nowhere else to go. "Copy that. Description: white freightliner, pulling a 40-foot refrigerated container. Driver is Sigrid Halverson. She's experienced, been running this route for years. Cell's not responding. Weather's clear. She should have made it through." "That's what we thought. Can you run up and check? Could be mechanical trouble." "On my way." Baptiste accelerated carefully. Speed on ice roads was tricky, too fast, and you could hit a weak spot. Too slow, and you might not generate enough momentum to cross questionable sections. The sweet spot was around 40 kilometers per hour. He drove for 20 minutes, watching the kilometers tick by on his odometer. The landscape remained featureless. White on white on white. Then he saw it. The truck sat in the middle of the road, engine running. Exhaust plumed from the stack in thick white clouds. The refrigeration unit on the trailer hummed audibly, even from a distance. But the truck wasn't moving. Baptiste pulled up behind it and killed his engine. He radioed base. Found the truck, stationary but running. I'm going to check it out. Copy. Be careful. The cold hit him like a physical force when he opened the door. His breath froze instantly into ice crystals that hung in the air. He pulled his parka hood tight and walked toward the truck, boots crunching on packed snow. Everything looked normal. No visible damage. No signs of an accident. The truck just sat there, idling. Baptiste walked around to the driver's side and climbed up on the running board. He knocked on the window. No response. He tried the door. Unlocked, he pulled it open and looked inside. The cab was empty. The driver's seat was pushed back like someone had just gotten out. A thermos sat in the cup holder, still steaming. The radio was on, tuned to a station playing country music at low volume. On the passenger seat lay a tablet showing a digital logbook, but no driver. Baptiste climbed into the cab, looking for any sign of what had happened. The keys dangled from the ignition. The heater was on full blast. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the dashboard, not even frozen yet. It was as if Sigrid had simply vanished mid-drive. He checked the GPS unit mounted to the dash. It showed the truck's position as Checkpoint Delta, the destination Sigrid should have reached 2 hours ago. But Baptiste knew exactly where he was, and this was not Checkpoint Delta. They were at least 40 kilometers short. He grabbed the truck's radio handset. "This is Border Patrol Officer Tremblay. If anyone can hear this, I'm in truck TN 4799. Driver is missing. Please respond." Static answered him. He tried again. Nothing but white noise. Baptiste climbed down and walked to the back of the trailer. The refrigeration unit was running properly, temperature gauge reading -20 Celsius. The doors were sealed, locks intact. He returned to his patrol truck and grabbed his own GPS unit. According to his device, they were at the exact coordinates he expected, 43 kilometers south of Checkpoint Delta, but the truck's GPS insisted they were at the checkpoint. Baptiste radioed base again. "Base, this is Patrol 7. Driver is not in the vehicle. Truck appears abandoned, but engine running. GPS shows conflicting information." "Say again, Patrol 7? We're getting interference. The driver is gone, truck is empty. Do you copy?" The response was garbled, words breaking apart into fragments. "Copy, grid, possible. Base, you're breaking up. I need backup at my current position. 30 minutes, proceed." The radio dissolved into static. Baptiste stood between the two vehicles, looking north along the endless white road. The silence was absolute. Not even the wind made a sound. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums, that made you aware of your own heartbeat. He walked a circle around both vehicles, looking for footprints other than his own. The snow was undisturbed. If Sigrid had left the truck, she'd done so without leaving a trace, unless she'd left before the snow stopped falling. But when had it snowed last? Not since yesterday afternoon. Baptiste checked the time. 2:47 p.m. Sunset in about 30 minutes, and then the temperature would plummet another 10 degrees. He made a decision. He'd drive ahead, following the route to Checkpoint Delta. Maybe Sigrid had walked forward for some reason. Maybe she'd gotten disoriented, thought the checkpoint was closer than it was. He climbed back into his patrol truck and started the engine. As he pulled around the cargo truck, he glanced at the driver's side mirror. In the reflection, he saw someone sitting in the truck's cab. Baptiste slammed on his brakes and twisted around to look. The cab was empty. He sat very still, heart pounding. Then he looked at his mirror again. Nothing, just the empty truck. His hands were shaking slightly as he put the vehicle in gear and continued north. The kilometers passed slowly. Baptiste kept checking his GPS, watching the distance to checkpoint Delta decrease. 55 kilometers. 50. 45. At 43 kilometers, something made him look at his odometer. He'd driven 11 kilometers from where he'd found the truck. But according to his GPS, he'd only covered 3. Baptiste stopped the vehicle and stared at the numbers. That was impossible. The GPS and odometer should match. They always matched. He looked out at the road ahead. Perfectly straight. Perfectly empty. He put the truck in gear and drove another 5 kilometers according to his odometer. The GPS showed he'd moved 2 kilometers. Something was wrong with the distance, with the space itself. He was driving, covering ground, but the coordinates weren't changing at the rate they should. Baptiste grabbed his radio. "Base, I've got a major equipment malfunction, both GPS and..." He stopped. Ahead on the road, maybe 200 meters distant, sat the white Freightliner. The same truck, the same position, engine running, exhaust plume rising into the gray sky. Baptiste felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. He'd driven 15 kilometers. He should be far ahead of where the truck had been, unless he hadn't driven anywhere at all. He checked his fuel gauge. It had dropped by exactly the amount it should have for 15 kilometers of driving. His odometer confirmed the distance. But the GPS, and now his own eyes, said something different. He was back where he'd started. Baptiste put the vehicle in reverse and looked at his mirrors. Behind him, the road stretched empty to the southern horizon. He drove backward for a full minute, then stopped and looked forward again. The cargo truck sat ahead of him. Same distance. Same position. He tried driving forward. Same result. No matter how far he went, the truck remained 200 meters ahead, always just out of reach. Baptiste's breath was coming faster now. He forced himself to calm down, to think. This had to be some kind of optical illusion. The flat landscape, the uniform whiteness, it was playing tricks with perspective. He drove forward again, this time watching the truck carefully. He saw details emerge as he approached. The company logo on the door, the license plate, individual rivets on the trailer panels. He was getting closer. At 50 meters, he could see frost patterns on the cab windows. At 20 meters, he could read the individual letters on the registration sticker. At 10 meters, the truck started moving forward, not accelerating like a normal vehicle, just sliding forward at exactly the same speed Baptiste was approaching, maintaining the constant distance between them. Baptiste stopped his truck. The cargo truck stopped too. He sat there, hands gripping the wheel, watching the other vehicle's exhaust continue to plume. After a long moment, he reached for the door handle. Maybe he needed to walk. Maybe that would break whatever was happening. He stepped out into the cold and started walking toward the truck, each step crunching in the snow. 10 steps. 20. The truck stayed where it was. At 30 steps, he could see inside the cab again. Sigrid Halverson sat in the driver's seat. She was facing forward, hands on the wheel, perfectly still. Her hood was up, face shadowed. She didn't move, didn't respond to Baptiste's approach. "Sigrid," he called out, "can you hear me?" Nothing. He walked closer. The distance between them shortened normally now. Whatever had been keeping them apart seemed to have stopped. Baptiste reached the driver's door and climbed up on the running board. He knocked on the window right next to where Sigrid sat. She didn't react. He tried the door handle, locked this time. He knocked harder, loud enough to wake anyone. Sigrid sat motionless. Baptiste pulled out his flashlight and shone it through the window. The light illuminated the cab interior, the thermos, the tablet, the half-eaten sandwich. But the driver's seat was empty. He blinked and looked again. Sigrid was there. He could see her. Dark parka, hood up, hands on the wheel. He moved his flashlight beam directly onto her. The beam passed through her and onto the seat beyond as if she wasn't there at all. Baptiste stumbled backward off the running board and hit the ice hard. Pain shot through his hip, but he barely felt it. He scrambled to his feet and backed away from the truck. The figure in the driver's seat turned its head, slowly, mechanically, until it was looking directly at Baptiste. He couldn't see a face under the hood, just darkness where a face should be. Darkness and 2 points of dim light where eyes might be. The figure raised one hand and pressed it against the window from inside. The glass fogged instantly around the contact point. Then, as Baptiste watched, words appeared in the condensation, written from inside the cab by that impossible hand. Same road. Same road. Same road. Over and over, the words appeared, filling the window in a spiral pattern. The hand moved frantically now, writing faster. Same road can't leave, same road help, same road. Baptiste turned and ran. He sprinted for his patrol truck, breath tearing at his lungs in the frigid air. He didn't look back. He threw himself into the driver's seat and started the engine, hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the key. He put it in gear and accelerated, not caring about the ice conditions. The truck fishtailed slightly, but he maintained control, speeding south, away from the cargo truck, away from whatever had been in that cab. His speedometer hit 60, 70. Too fast for an ice road, but he didn't care. 1 kilometer, 2, 5, 10. He kept checking his mirror, expecting to see the white Freightliner appearing behind him. But the road stayed empty. At 20 kilometers, he started to slow down. His hands were still shaking. His heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed the radio. "Base, this is Patrol 7. Emergency. Do you copy?" "Patrol 7, we read you. What's your status?" Thank God. Clear communication again. "I need immediate backup, and I need you to pull all GPS data for truck TN47 Line 9 for the last 6 hours. Copy that. What happened?" "I found the truck. Something's wrong with it. Something's wrong with that whole stretch of road. Is the driver safe?" Baptiste opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. He had no idea how to explain what he'd seen, or thought he'd seen. "Negative. Driver is still missing. But I found evidence of... I don't know how to describe it. We're sending backup. ETA 45 minutes. Return to base for debrief." Baptiste continued south, checking his mirrors constantly. The cargo truck didn't reappear. The road stayed normal. His GPS and odometer matched properly again. When he finally reached base 3 hours later, the outpost medic, Hugh Arlen, was waiting. He checked Baptiste for frostbite and hypothermia, then sat him down with hot coffee. "You look like you've seen something," Hugh said quietly. "I don't know what I saw. Try me. I've been up here 7 years. I've heard everything." So Baptiste told him. The repeating distance, the figure in the cab, the words in the fog. Hugh listened without interruption. When Baptiste finished, the medic was quiet for a long time. Then he went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. 3 years ago, Hugh said, we had another truck disappear on that stretch. Different company, different driver. Found the truck 2 weeks later, covered in snow. Engine had run until it ran out of fuel. Did you find the driver? Yeah, frozen solid. Still in the cab, hands on the wheel. Hugh opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. But here's the thing, look at this. The photo showed the inside of a truck cab. The windshield was fogged, and written in the condensation from the inside were words. Same road, can't leave same road. The exact same words Baptiste had seen. The driver had been dead for at least 10 days when we found him, Hugh continued. But his GPS log showed he'd been driving the entire time. 40 kilometers of road, over and over for 10 days straight. The coordinates looped, same section again and again. Baptiste felt sick. That's impossible. That's what everyone said. We ruled it equipment failure. Decided his GPS malfunctioned, he got disoriented, drove in circles somehow without realizing it. You don't believe that. I've driven that road 100 times since then. Never had a problem. Hugh closed the folder. But twice now, in the dead of winter, someone's gotten caught in that 40-kilometer stretch, and they never make it out. What about Sigrid? The backup team reached the location you reported. No truck, no evidence of any vehicle being there. Fresh snow, completely undisturbed. That's impossible. I saw it. I touched it. I believe you. But according to every record we have, truck TN 4799 is still on the road somewhere. Still moving. Its GPS keeps pinging, showing it driving north toward Checkpoint Delta. Same 40 kilometers, over and over. Baptiste stood up, coffee forgotten. We have to find her. We've been looking, but here's what I don't understand. Hugh pulled out another paper. This is Sigrid's GPS log from today. It shows her entering that stretch of road at 11:47 a.m. The pings continue every few minutes, all showing normal progress. But look at the timestamps. Baptiste examined the log. The coordinates changed normally, but the timestamps were wrong. They jumped forward, then backward, then forward again. 11:47, then 12:03, then 11:58, then 12:15, then 11:52. The road doesn't just loop in space, Hugh said quietly. It loops in time too. She's stuck in those same moments, driving the same distance again and again. And every time she completes the loop, she probably forgets she already did it. Starts fresh, thinking this is the first time. How do we get her out? We don't. We can't even find the loop unless it wants to be found. You stumbled into it somehow, but you got back out. Most people don't. Baptiste looked at the GPS log again. The timestamps continued their impossible dance. Somewhere out there, on 40 kilometers of frozen road, Sigrid Halverson was still driving. Still trying to reach Checkpoint Delta, still believing this was the first time, and she'd keep driving forever. He left the outpost that night and drove home on numb autopilot. But before he reached his apartment, he found himself pulling over, checking his own GPS. The coordinates were normal, everything was normal, except his odometer showed he'd driven 16 kilometers since leaving base. The GPS showed 12. Baptiste sat in his idling truck, staring at the numbers. Behind him, headlights appeared on the dark road. Another vehicle approaching. He watched it in his mirror, getting closer. It was a white Freightliner, pulling a refrigerated trailer. It passed him without slowing and continued down the road. He couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows, couldn't see the registration number in the dark. But as it passed, he heard it. The faint sound of a hand slapping against glass from inside the cab. And through the sleeper compartment window, barely visible, words appearing in the fog. Same road. The truck disappeared into the darkness ahead. Baptiste checked his fuel gauge, his GPS, his mirrors. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. He pulled back onto the road and drove home carefully, counting every kilometer, checking each reading twice. When he finally parked outside his building, his odometer and GPS matched perfectly. But in his logbook, which he kept on the passenger seat, a new entry had appeared in handwriting that wasn't his. Officer B. Tremblay, Patrol 7, entered Loop 1423, still searching for exit. Distance covered, 43 kilometers. Distance traveled, 0 kilometers. And below it, in the same hand, if you're reading this, you're already inside. Baptiste never returned to patrol duty. He requested immediate reassignment to desk work, and it was granted without question. Hugh Arlen told him others had done the same after encountering the loop. The ice road still operates every winter. Trucks still run that route. Most make it through without incident, but every few years, one doesn't arrive at Checkpoint Delta. The GPS keeps pinging. The coordinates keep looping. And somewhere in the endless white, on 40 kilometers of frozen road that exists in its own circle of time and space, drivers keep trying to reach their destination. They'll never make it, but they'll never stop trying. The St. John River was running high, brown water churning with debris from upstream. Ishbel McCready stood at the crossing station watching tree branches and pieces of dock lumber sweep past in the current. The spring melt had come early this year, and heavy rains had turned the usual calm crossing into something dangerous. They should have closed the ferry route yesterday, but commerce demanded the crossing stay open as long as possible, and Ishbel's job was to process whatever came through. Border officer for 12 years, and she'd never seen the river like this. The water had risen 3 feet in the last 24 hours, lapping at the base of the station building. Her radio crackled. "Station 4, this is Central. Ferry's running late. Should have been there 30 minutes ago." Ishbel checked her watch. 7:47 p.m. The last ferry was supposed to dock at 7:15. "Copy that. River conditions are bad. They probably slowed down for safety." Cormac called in from the dock at 6:30, said he was making the crossing. "Should have reached you by now." Cormac Leahy had been running the ferry for longer than Ishbel had worked the crossing. If anyone could handle rough water, it was him, but even Cormac had his limits. "I'll watch for them. Weather's getting worse, though. Keep us posted." Ishbel moved to the window overlooking the river. Rain streaked the glass, and beyond it, the water looked more like an ocean than a river. White caps broke against the pilings, and the current pulled south with visible force. No lights on the water. No sign of the ferry. She went outside, pulling her hood up against the rain. The dock stretched into the river, waves sloshing over its surface. The security lights cast yellow circles that barely penetrated the darkness and precipitation. Still, no ferry. Ishbel walked to the end of the dock, careful of her footing on the slick boards. The river roared around her, and she could feel the vibration through the pilings. Upstream, where the ferry should appear, there was only darkness and rain. She was about to head back inside when she saw it. A light, dim and yellow, moving through the rain. The ferry emerged from the darkness like a ghost, riding low in the water. Its running lights were off. Only a single lantern swung from the wheelhouse, giving it that strange, dim glow. Ishbel waved her flashlight, signaling the approach. The ferry changed course slightly, angling toward the dock. It moved wrong, though. Too slow. Not fighting the current the way it should be. It drifted more than motored. The ferry bumped against the pilings with a hollow thud. Ishbel grabbed her radio. "Central, ferry's here. Coming in dark. Something might be wrong." "Copy. Let us know when you've checked it out." Ishbel secured the mooring lines as the ferry settled against the dock. The deck was empty. No crew visible. The wheelhouse windows were dark except for that single swinging lantern. "Cormac?" she called out. "You okay?" No answer. She stepped aboard carefully, the ferry rocking beneath her. Water sloshed across the deck, more than there should be. The ferry was taking on water somewhere, riding at least 6 inches lower than normal. "Cormac!" She made her way toward the wheelhouse. The door was closed, but unlocked. Ishbel pushed it open and stepped inside. Cormac sat at the wheel, facing forward. His rain gear dripped water onto the floor. His hands rested on the controls. "Cormac, are you—" He turned to look at her, and Ishbel's words died in her throat. Cormac's face was gray. His eyes were wrong, unfocused and distant, as if he was looking at something very far away. Water dripped from his beard and hair, but not rainwater. River water. Brown and full of silt. "Made it," he said. His voice sounded hollow, echoing oddly in the small space. "Finally made it. Are you hurt? What happened out there?" "River's got a pull to it tonight." Cormac turned back to the wheel. "Stronger than it's ever been. Almost didn't make it across. You should have turned back. Conditions are too dangerous." Couldn't turn back. Had passengers manifest to deliver. Ishbel looked at the clipboard hanging by the door. The ferry manifest. The list of vehicles and passengers being transported across. She picked it up and shone her flashlight on it. The page was wet, ink bleeding slightly, but she could make out the entries. Vehicle 1, logging truck, single occupant. Vehicle 2, sedan, family of 4. Vehicle 3, van, 2 occupants, 7 passengers total, plus Cormac. "Where are the passengers?" Ishbel asked. Cormac gestured toward the deck without looking. "Out there, waiting for processing." But Ishbel had seen the deck. It was empty. She left the wheelhouse and walked to the vehicle area. 3 vehicles sat there, exactly as the manifest described. A logging truck with mud-spattered sides, a family sedan with Quebec plates, a white van with tinted windows, all empty. Ishbel checked each vehicle carefully. The truck's cab smelled of coffee and cigarettes. The sedan had child seats in the back, toys scattered on the floor. The van's interior was clean and bare, but no people. She returned to the wheelhouse. "Cormac, where are your passengers?" "Right there on the manifest. 7 of them. The vehicles are here, but the people aren't." Cormac finally looked at her again. That same distant, unfocused stare. "They're here. Made sure everyone got aboard before we left. Counted them twice." A chill ran down Ishbel's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Cormac, I need you to step outside, right now." "Can't leave the wheel. River's too strong, have to keep us steady." "We're docked, the ferry's secured." "Have to keep us steady," he repeated, hands tightening on the controls. Ishbel backed out of the wheelhouse and grabbed her radio. "Central, this is Station 4. I need backup immediately. Ferry captain is not responding normally. Passengers are unaccounted for." "Copy. What's the situation?" "I don't know yet. Just send someone." She approached the logging truck and opened the driver's door. The interior light came on, illuminating the cab. A thermos sat in the cup holder. A jacket lay across the passenger seat. The keys dangled from the ignition. On the seat, partially hidden under the jacket, was a wallet. Ishbel opened it. Driver's license, Greta Fenwick, age 34. Address in New Brunswick. She photographed the license with her phone, then checked the sedan. Also empty, but personal belongings everywhere. Purses, phones. A wallet in the center console belonging to someone named Martin LeBlanc. The van was different. It was clean. Too clean. No personal items at all. No registration in the glove box. No garbage in the door pockets. just empty space that smelled faintly of river water. Ishbel returned to the dock and called Central again. "Run these names for me. Greta Fenwick and Martin LeBlanc. Both should have crossed the ferry tonight. Stand by." While she waited, Ishbel examined the ferry more carefully. The water on the deck was deeper than she'd first thought, and it wasn't draining properly. It pooled in corners, thick with sediment. And there were footprints. Wet prints leading from the wheelhouse to the vehicle area. Not Cormac's boots. These were bare feet. Multiple sets, different sizes. The prints led to each vehicle, then stopped. Just ended at the driver's doors, as if whoever made them had simply disappeared into the cars. "Station 4, we've got a problem." The dispatcher's voice was tight. "Greta Fenwick, logging truck driver, reported missing 3 days ago. Vehicle found abandoned at the North Ferry dock. She never made it aboard." Ishbel's hand tightened on the radio. "That's impossible. Her truck is here, on the ferry. And Martin LeBlanc, he and his family, wife and 2 children, they went missing 5 days ago. Last seen near the crossing. Search teams found their car in the river yesterday, a mile downstream. All 4 occupants drowned." The radio almost slipped from Ishbel's hand. "Central, say again." "The people on that manifest, they're dead. They've been dead for days." Ishbel looked at the ferry, at the 3 vehicles sitting there with their owners' belongings still inside, at the footprints leading nowhere. She walked slowly back to the wheelhouse. Cormac still sat at the wheel, perfectly still now. The lantern swung overhead, casting moving shadows. "Cormac, when did you leave the North Dock?" 6:30. Like always. "Did you check your passengers? Did you verify they were alive?" For the first time, Cormac's expression changed. Confusion flickered across his gray face. "They were there. They got on. I saw them." "What do they look like?" I don't..." He trailed off, staring at his hands on the wheel. "They were wet. All of them were soaking wet when they boarded. Said they'd been caught in the rain, but..." "But what?" "The rain hadn't started yet when we left. Not till we were halfway across." His voice was barely a whisper now. "And they didn't talk. Not once during the crossing. They just stood on the deck, staring at the water." Ishbel felt the ferry shift beneath her feet. The river was rising higher, water now lapping over the dock's surface. "Cormac, we need to get off this ferry, right now." "Can't. Have to complete the manifest, have to log everyone through." He reached for the clipboard with shaking hands. That's when Ishbel saw it. The manifest had 2 pages. Cormac had been looking at the top one. She grabbed the clipboard and flipped to the second page. The handwriting was different. Shakier. The ink was fresher, darker. Vehicle 1, ferry boat, single occupant operator, C. Law height status, recovered from river, 2.3 km downstream. Time of recovery, 19:15. Condition, deceased. Below that, a note in the same handwriting. Body found still gripping wheel. Ferry had run aground on rocks, no passengers aboard, no vehicles. Cause of death, drowning. Estimated time of death, 18 Hunquag. Ishbel looked up at Cormac. He was still staring at the wheel, but now she could see river water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. Not rain, river water, thick with silt and debris. "Cormac," she whispered. "What time did you say you left the North Dock?" 6:30. "What time is it now?" He checked his watch, then frowned. "My watch stopped at 6:47, the time he'd gone into the river, the time he'd drowned." "You didn't make it across," Ishbel said quietly. "Did you?" Cormac was silent for a long time. Then, very slowly, he shook his head. "The current caught us, pulled us sideways. I fought it, but his voice cracked. I felt the ferry go over, felt the water come in. Cold, so cold. Then how are you here? I don't know. I just knew I had to complete the crossing. Had to deliver the manifest. That's the job. He looked at her with those distant eyes. But the passengers, they were already in the water, already waiting. They got on when I went under. They wanted to finish their crossing too. Outside, Ishbel heard footsteps on the deck. Slow, shuffling footsteps. Multiple sets. She moved to the wheelhouse door and looked out. They stood in a line by the vehicles. 7 figures, soaking wet, river water streaming from their clothes and hair. A woman in logging gear, a man, woman, and 2 children in vacation clothes. 2 others she couldn't make out clearly, all of them staring at the wheelhouse, at her, waiting to be processed through, waiting to complete their crossing. One of the children raised a hand and waved. Water dripped from the small fingers. Ishbel backed into the wheelhouse, her heart hammering. Central, I need emergency backup at Station 4, right now. But the radio only produced static. She looked at it and saw water dripping from the speaker grill. The circuits were fried. Cormac stood up from the wheel. Water poured from his clothes, forming a puddle around his boots. You have to log them through. That's the procedure. Check the manifest and log them through. They're dead, Cormac. They're all dead. They're passengers. They need to be processed. He moved toward her, and with each step more water sloshed from his clothing. Please. It's the only way to finish the crossing. The footsteps on the deck were getting closer, coming toward the wheelhouse. Ishbel grabbed the manifest and ran. She jumped from the ferry onto the dock, her boots splashing in the water that now covered the wooden surface. The river had risen further, threatening to swallow the dock entirely. Behind her, she heard them coming, the wet footsteps on the dock, the dripping, the sound of waterlogged clothes dragging across wood. She ran for the station building, not looking back. The door was 30 meters away. 20, 10. She burst inside and slammed it, throwing the deadbolt. For a moment, there was only her ragged breathing and the sound of rain on the roof. Then the footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate. They surrounded the building. A knock on the door, soft and polite. Ishbel stood frozen, staring at the door. Another knock, then a voice, thin and waterlogged. Processing, please. We need to be logged through. More voices joined in. The logger, the family, all of them asking, pleading, to be processed through, to complete their crossing. Ishbel looked at the manifest still clutched in her hand. Both pages were there, water-stained and real. She stared at the entries, at the impossible truth written in 2 different hands. The knocking continued, patient, persistent. We've been waiting so long, a child's voice said. Please let us finish. Please let us through. Ishbel backed away from the door. She grabbed the landline phone. It still worked. She called Central and reported everything in a voice that shook despite her efforts to control it. They told her to stay inside. Help was coming. But the knocking didn't stop. All night they knocked and called out, begging to be processed through, begging to complete the crossing they'd died making. When backup arrived at dawn, the ferry was gone. Just empty water where it had been moored, the ropes hanging loose from the pilings. The river had receded to normal levels, taking with it all evidence of the night's events. Except for the footprints. Wet prints on the dock, leading from where the ferry had been to the station building. Then stopping at the threshold, as if they'd been denied entry. And in Ishbel's office, the manifest still sat on her desk. Both pages were there. But now there was a 3rd page beneath them, written in that shaky water-damaged hand. Vehicle 4, border station, single occupant operator, I. McCready. Status, still waiting. Time, unknown note. She wouldn't log us through. We're still here. Still waiting to finish our crossing. Ishbel requested immediate transfer. It was denied. She was needed at Station 4. They were short-staffed and the crossing was too important to close. She continues to work there, processing vehicles and passengers. The ferry runs on schedule. Cormac Leahy's body was recovered 3 days after that night, found still gripping the wheel of his sunken ferry 2 kilometers downstream. But every few weeks, on nights when the river runs high and rain obscures the water, a ferry arrives at Station 4. It comes in dark except for a single lantern. It carries 3 vehicles and 7 passengers who never quite seem to be there when you look directly at them. And Ishbel has to check the manifest. Every time, she hopes the names will be different, that it will be living passengers with living problems, wanting only to cross the border and continue their journey. But the names never change. And the knocking on her door continues some nights, patient and polite, asking her to please log them through so they can finally finish their crossing. She never opens the door. She never logs them through. Because she saw that 3rd page. She knows what happens if she completes the manifest. She'd become the next entry, another name on a list of those who never finish their crossing. So she waits, night after night, for the ferry that shouldn't exist, processing passengers who are somewhere between living and dead, working the station that has become its own kind of limbo. And sometimes, when the river rises high enough, she sees them standing on the far shore, all of them waiting for the ferry, growing in number year by year, all the people who died trying to cross, all the souls stuck in that space between departure and arrival, all waiting for someone to finally log them through. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, flat and featureless under a sky so vast it made Thaddeus Bellamy feel like an insect. He'd been working this section of the border for 2 years and he still couldn't get used to the emptiness. Miles and miles of nothing but grass and fence line and the occasional abandoned farmhouse. Tonight, the emptiness felt different, heavier somehow. He drove slowly along the patrol road, his headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the darkness. The fence ran parallel to his left, a simple chain-link barrier marking where Canada ended and the United States began. Not much of a barrier, really. Anyone determined enough could cut through it in minutes. Most nights, no one tried. His radio was quiet. Dispatch had checked in an hour ago, confirming he was the only patrol in this sector tonight. The next officer was 40 kilometers east, covering her own stretch of border. Thaddeus liked the solitude most of the time, but tonight, something felt off. He couldn't name it, just a prickling at the back of his neck, the sense that the darkness beyond his headlights was watching him. At 11:23 p.m., his motion sensor pinged. Thaddeus checked the display. Sector 7, about 2 kilometers ahead. Something had triggered the ground sensors buried along the fence line. He accelerated slightly, watching the darkness ahead. Animals tripped the sensors sometimes. Deer, coyotes, even rabbits if they hit just the right spot. But the readout showed a steady progression of triggers moving south to north, parallel to the fence, something walking upright. Thaddeus grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Patrol 9. I've got sensor activity in Sector 7, moving to investigate. Copy, Patrol 9. Keep us informed." He reached the location and stopped his vehicle, killing the headlights. Better to approach quietly, see what he was dealing with before announcing his presence. The night settled around him like a blanket. No moon, just stars scattered across the black sky, so many you could read by their light if you knew how. Thaddeus grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the vehicle. The temperature had dropped since sunset, and his breath formed a small clouds. The prairie grass whispered around his boots, dry and brittle from summer heat. He approached the fence line carefully, flashlight off. His eyes adjusted to the starlight, picking out shapes in the darkness. The fence stretched ahead, posts every 10 meters creating a rhythm in the landscape. Nothing moved. Thaddeus switched on his flashlight, sweeping the beam along the fence. The light caught on something near the base of the chain link. Footprints. 2 sets, side by side. He crouched down to examine them. Fresh impressions in the soft earth near the fence. Bare feet. Strange for a prairie night, but not unheard of. Sometimes people trying to cross discarded their shoes to move more quietly. But these prints were odd. Both sets were the same size, same depth. As if 2 people of identical weight and build had been walking in perfect step with each other. Thaddeus followed the trail with his flashlight. The prints led along the fence from south to north, exactly as the sensors had indicated. He counted 10 steps. 15. 20. Then, at the 23rd step, one set of prints vanished. Not faded, not obscured. Just gone. 1 foot would be there, pressed clearly into the dirt. Then nothing, empty ground. Then, the second set of prints continued alone for another 3 steps before stopping entirely. Thaddeus stood up slowly, his flashlight fixed on the impossible trail. He walked to where the prints ended and crouched again, examining the final impression. A left foot, toes pointing north. The detail was perfect. Individual toe marks, the ball of the foot, the heel. Beyond it, nothing, not even disturbed grass. He radioed dispatch. "I've got something strange here. 2 sets of footprints along the fence. 1 set just stops, like someone vanished mid-step. Any sign of the individuals? Negative, no one in sight. Could be a false trail, people trying to confuse us about their actual crossing point. Maybe." But Thaddeus didn't believe it. The prints were too fresh, too clear. And the way they ended, it was wrong. He stood and swept his flashlight across the prairie. The grass swayed gently in a breeze he couldn't feel. Everything looked normal, except the smell. Thaddeus inhaled deeply, trying to identify it. Damp earth. Organic decay, like a swamp or marsh. But this was prairie land, dry as bone. The nearest water was a creek bed 15 kilometers east, and it had been empty since June. He followed his nose, moving away from the fence. The smell grew stronger with each step, sweet and rotten at the same time. It reminded him of the bog he'd once visited in Minnesota, that distinctive scent of vegetation breaking down in standing water. 10 meters from the fence, he found the source. A patch of ground about 3 meters across was dark. Not just dark, wet. The earth was saturated, muddy, as if water was seeping up from below. The grass around it was bent and flattened, dying. Thaddeus knelt at the edge of the wet area and touched the mud. It was cold, colder than it should be. His fingers came away stained black, and the smell hit him full force. Marsh water, deep and old. He stood and wiped his hand on his pants. This made no sense. The water table was deep here. You'd have to drill 30 meters to hit moisture. Yet, here it was, pooling on the surface like it had been here for weeks. But it hadn't been. He'd driven this section 2 nights ago. The ground had been normal then. Thaddeus walked around the wet patch, careful not to step in it. On the far side, he found something that made him stop cold. More footprints. Both sets, emerging from the mud. They were the same prints he'd followed along the fence. Same size, same spacing. But these led away from the wet area, heading north across the prairie. As if 2 people had walked to the fence, one had vanished into the ground, and then both had emerged from this impossible pool of marsh water and continued their journey. Thaddeus keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at my location. and I need you to check geological surveys for this area, specifically any reports of underground water or sinkholes. Copy. Backup is 40 minutes out. Stand by for geological data. 40 minutes, Thaddeus looked at the wet patch again, then at the prints leading away from it. The trail headed north into Canadian territory. He should follow it, see where it led, but everything in him resisted that idea. He walked back to his vehicle and grabbed his heavy flashlight, the one that could light up 50 meters. Back at the wet patch, he aimed the beam north, following the line of footprints. The prints continued for maybe 30 meters. Then they just stopped, same as before. Both sets this time, ending simultaneously at a point in the middle of empty prairie. Thaddeus walked to the end of the trail. The final prints were deep, as if whoever made them had been carrying weight, or sinking. He crouched and touched the last impression. The dirt was cold, much colder than it should be, and damp despite being far from the wet patch. He stood and swept his light around. Nothing but grass and darkness. No sign of where the people had gone. Behind him, from the direction of the wet area, he heard something. A sound like water moving, not flowing, shifting, as if something had disturbed a pool. Thaddeus turned his light back toward the marsh patch. It was bigger, he was sure of it. The wet area had spread, now maybe 4 meters across, and the edges were expanding as he watched, dark moisture creeping through the grass. He backed away, keeping his light on the spreading water. The smell was stronger now, almost overwhelming. Marsh rot and something else. Something animal. The water stopped spreading when it reached the fence line. It pooled there, lapping gently against the chain link as if it were ashore. Thaddeus heard the sound again. Closer this time. Definitely water, but with another quality to it. Breathing, maybe. Or something surfacing. He wanted to run back to his vehicle. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. But his training held him in place. Document the anomaly. Wait for backup. Don't abandon your post. His radio crackled. Patrol 9, we've pulled geological data for your sector. No water table within 40 meters of surface. No sinkholes reported. No springs. That area should be completely dry. It's not, Thaddeus said, his voice tight. I'm looking at standing water right now, and it's spreading. How fast? Thaddeus checked the distance. The wet area had grown another meter while he'd been talking. Fast. A shape broke the surface of the water. Thaddeus stumbled backward, his light swinging wildly before finding the target again. It was a hand, pale and waterlogged, fingers spread wide. It reached up from the center of the pool, groping at the air. Then a second hand appeared beside it. Thaddeus ran. He made it back to his vehicle in seconds, threw himself inside, and started the engine. In his mirror, he could see the wet area still expanding, now lapping at the patrol road. His radio crackled with static, then a voice emerged. Not dispatch, something else. Sector 7, help requested, crossing assistance required. The voice was wrong. Wet sounding, words garbled as if spoken through water. Who is this? Thaddeus demanded. Identify yourself. Crossing assistance, please, can't find the surface. Another voice joined it, same wet quality. Been walking. So long, ground keeps pulling us down. Thaddeus looked in his mirror again. The hands had disappeared, but now the water itself was moving. Flowing uphill, away from the fence, spreading across the prairie with purpose. Coming toward his vehicle. He put it in gear and accelerated hard. The tires spun for a moment on the wet ground, then caught, launching him forward down the patrol road. In his mirror, he saw the water reach where his vehicle had been parked. It pooled there briefly, then receded, flowing back toward the fence. Thaddeus drove for 5 kilometers before pulling over. His hands were shaking on the wheel. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch, this is Patrol 9. I'm clear of the area, but something's wrong with Sector 7. Seriously wrong. Copy. Backup is 20 minutes out. What's your status? I'm fine, but don't send anyone to that wet area. Something's in it. Say again? There's something in the water. I don't know what I saw. The line was quiet for a moment, then, hold your position. Backup will meet you there. Thaddeus sat in his vehicle, lights on, engine running. He watched the road behind him for any sign of spreading water, for any sign of pale hands reaching up from impossible marsh. His phone buzzed, a text message from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it. A photo. His own vehicle, taken from behind. Taken from where he'd just been standing. Below the photo, a message. Still need crossing assistance. Been walking so long. Please don't leave us down here. Thaddeus dropped the phone. He looked in his mirror. The road behind him was empty, but his phone buzzed again. Another photo, closer this time. His vehicle from 50 meters away, then 30, then 10. The photos kept coming, each one closer. Taken from a perspective that shouldn't exist on empty prairie. Taken by something following him. Something that could move unseen across the grass. The last photo showed his vehicle from directly behind. Taken from where his rear bumper would be. And in the bottom corner of the image, partially visible, was a hand, pale and dripping, pressed against his tailgate. Thaddeus looked in his mirror. Nothing there. He opened his door and leaned out to look at the back of his vehicle. 5 handprints marked the tailgate. Wet handprints, trailing water. They hadn't been there when he'd stopped. Thaddeus pulled his door shut and locked it. He started driving again, not waiting for backup. He drove until he reached the main highway, until he saw other vehicles and lights and civilization. But the texts kept coming. Photos of his vehicle from every angle. Messages asking for crossing assistance, begging not to be left underground. When backup finally arrived, they found Thaddeus parked at a gas station 40 kilometers from Sector 7. He'd washed the handprints off his vehicle 3 times, but they kept reappearing. Wet and cold and persistent. The officers went to investigate Sector 7. They found the wet area exactly where Thaddeus described it. But by the time they arrived, it was already drying up, shrinking back into the earth. They followed the footprints, both sets leading to the fence. One vanishing, both emerging from the water, both ending in empty prairie. But when they measured the prints, something was wrong. The depth was inconsistent. Some prints pressed deep into the earth as if bearing enormous weight. Others barely marked the surface, as if whoever made them was becoming lighter, fading, or sinking. They excavated the wet area. At 3 meters down, they hit water, marsh water, full of organic matter. At 4 meters, they found clothing, old clothing, decades out of style. At 5 meters, they stopped digging. The smell was too strong, and something in the water kept pulling at their tools, trying to drag them down. The site was closed, marked as unstable ground. Thaddeus was cleared for duty after a psychological evaluation, though he requested transfer to a different sector. Request denied. He was the only officer familiar with Sector 7, and someone needed to patrol it. He still works that stretch of border, still drives past the spot where the wet area appeared. The ground is dry now, has been for months. But some nights, when he passes Sector 7, his sensors pick up movement. 2 sets of footprints appearing on his tracking system, walking parallel to the fence. One set always vanishes halfway through. Both sets always emerge somewhere else. And on those nights, his phone fills with photos. Images of his vehicle from impossible angles. Messages asking for help with crossing. Asking why he won't guide them to the surface. Because they've been walking underground for so long. Through earth that behaves like water. through space that shouldn't exist. They just want to finish their crossing. They just want to reach the surface. But Thaddeus knows if he helps them, if he acknowledges their presence, something will change. The barrier between solid ground and whatever space they're walking through will weaken. And he's seen the depth measurements, seen how deep they are. 5 meters under the prairie, and still sinking, still walking, still believing they're almost at the surface, almost through their crossing, if someone would just help them find the way. Eulalie Finch runs the farm nearest to Sector 7. She mentioned something to Thaddeus once over coffee at the gas station. Said her grandfather used to tell stories about the land, how it used to be marsh 100 years ago, how they'd drained it and built over it, but the water never really went away, just went down where it waited. And sometimes, her grandfather said, people would go missing on the marsh. Not drown, just vanish. Step into the wrong spot and fall through into something that wasn't quite water and wasn't quite earth. Into space that existed between solid and liquid. Space where you could walk forever, thinking you were about to surface, never realizing you were sinking deeper with every step. The marsh remembered those people, her grandfather said. And sometimes it let them try again, let them walk their crossing one more time, emerging in new places, still searching for the surface, still hoping this time they'd make it through. Thaddeus thinks about that story every time he patrols Sector 7, every time his phone buzzes with new photos. Last week, Rafe Whitcomb, the tow truck driver who covers this area, called him. Said he'd found a vehicle on the side road near the fence. Abandoned, doors locked, no sign of the driver. Inside the vehicle, the GPS showed a recorded route. 2 points on the map, connected by a line. The start point was 5 meters underground. The end point was at the surface in Sector 7. The route showed someone had walked that line, underground, following what they thought was a path to the surface. They never made it. But their vehicle had appeared anyway, empty and waiting. Just like the footprints appear and vanish. Just like the wet patch rises and recedes. Evidence of people still trying to complete their crossing. Still walking through that space between water and earth, believing they're almost there. Almost at the surface, almost home. But they'll never make it. Because they're not walking up. They're walking deeper, into a space that feeds on hope and determination, into marsh that should have stayed buried. Thaddeus knows this now. And every night he patrols Sector 7, he ignores the photos on his phone. Ignores the messages begging for help. Because helping them means joining them. Means stepping into that space between solid and liquid, between surface and depth. Means walking forever, believing you're almost there, while you sink deeper into earth that remembers being water. And the prairie keeps its secrets, flat and empty under the vast sky, while beneath it, in the buried marsh, footsteps continue their endless crossing. The warehouse sat at the edge of the industrial zone, a hulking concrete structure that had seen better days. Owen Blackshaw pulled up to the loading dock and killed his engine, looking at the building with the vague unease he always felt when processing abandoned shipments. Someone had walked away from whatever was inside, left it here at the border, unclaimed. That was never a good sign. His radio crackled. "Patrol 3, this is dispatch. You at the warehouse?" "Just arrived." "What's the story on this one?" "Container came through 3 days ago. Manifest says industrial equipment, but the shipper never picked it up. Company phone numbers disconnected. We need you to verify contents and log it for seizure." Owen grabbed his tablet and clipboard. "Any red flags?" "Nothing on paper, but the weight's off." "Off how?" "Manifest says 11,000 kilos. Scale at the crossing said 9,000. Could be an error, could be something else. Could be a lot of things, Owen thought. Smugglers sometimes listed false weights to throw off inspections, but usually they went higher, not lower. I'll check it out. He stepped out of his vehicle into the gray afternoon. November on the Great Lakes meant perpetual overcast and the smell of cold water. The warehouse was one of dozens in this zone, most of them half empty or abandoned entirely, as shipping moved elsewhere. The loading dock door was closed but unlocked. Owen pulled it up and stepped inside. The warehouse was massive, probably 20,000 square feet of open space. Most of it was empty, just concrete floor and support columns marching into the darkness. Near the far wall sat the container, a standard 40-foot shipping unit, dark blue paint faded and rusted. The customs seals were intact. Owen checked them carefully, comparing the serial numbers to his manifest. Everything matched. No one had opened this container since it left its origin port. So why did it weigh 2,000 kilos less than declared? Owen walked around the container, inspecting it. No visible damage. No holes cut in the sides. The refrigeration unit on top was off. This was a standard container, not a reefer. He photographed the seals, then broke them and unlocked the door. The smell hit him immediately. Cold. Not refrigerated cold, but the deep chill of a meat locker. And underneath it, something else. Something organic and wrong. Owen stepped back, pulling his jacket tighter. His breath formed clouds in the air, even though the warehouse itself wasn't particularly cold. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the container. Boxes. Dozens of them, stacked neatly on pallets. Industrial equipment, just like the manifest said. He could see printing on the sides, part numbers, handling instructions, the logo of a machine shop in Michigan. Everything looked normal, except for the temperature. Owen climbed into the container, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The cold intensified immediately, as if he'd stepped into a freezer. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating row after row of boxes. He checked the first box, sealed, labeled correctly. He hefted it. Felt about right for the listed contents. He checked the second, the third. All correct. But the cold was getting worse. His fingers were going numb. He could see his breath in thick clouds now, and frost was forming on the metal walls. This was wrong. Standard containers didn't maintain temperature. If the refrigeration unit was off, the interior should be the same temperature as outside. Owen moved deeper into the container, checking boxes as he went. Everything seemed legitimate, but the manifest listed 37 boxes. He counted carefully. 29. He counted again. Still 29. 8 boxes short. That would account for some of the weight discrepancy. But where had the other boxes gone? The seals were intact. No one had opened this container, unless the boxes had never been loaded in the first place. False manifest, false weight declaration. He'd seen it before. Owen was about to leave when he noticed something. At the back of the container, behind the last stack of boxes, the wall looked wrong. He aimed his flashlight at it. There was a gap, a seam in the metal, barely visible. Owen approached it carefully. The cold was intense here, so cold it hurt to breathe. Frost covered every surface, thick and white. He examined the seam. It was a panel, he realized, cut into the back wall and welded back in place. You'd never notice it from outside, and the customs seals wouldn't show any tampering. But someone had modified this container, built a hidden compartment. Owen grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got something. Container's been modified. There's a false wall." "Copy. Can you access the hidden section?" "Working on it." He ran his hands along the seam, looking for a way to open it. His fingers found a latch, cleverly hidden in the frost. He pulled it. The panel swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. The cold that rushed out made Owen gasp. It was like opening a door to winter itself. A wave of frigid air that crystallized instantly in his lungs. He stepped back, coughing, eyes watering. When his vision cleared, he aimed his flashlight into the hidden compartment. It was empty, just bare metal walls and floor, about 2 meters deep. No boxes, no contraband, nothing. But the temperature was impossible, easily -30, maybe colder. And there was something on the floor, frost, but not normal frost. It had formed in patterns, shapes that looked almost deliberate. Owen climbed carefully into the hidden section, his flashlight revealing more details. The patterns in the frost were footprints, multiple sets, different sizes. As if several people had stood here, their body heat leaving impressions in the ice. But that made no sense. No one could survive in this temperature for more than a few minutes. And the footprints led nowhere. They just ended in the middle of the space, facing the walls. Owen noticed something else. On each wall, at about chest height, were marks, scratches in the metal. Deep ones, as if made by fingernails, or desperate hands. His radio crackled, but the sound was distorted. "Patrol? You copy? Dispatch, signal's breaking up. I'm in the hidden compartment, The panel swung shut behind him. Owen spun around, his flashlight beam catching the door as it closed. He lunged for it, but the latch had already engaged. He was locked inside. "Dispatch!" He hammered on the door. "I'm trapped in the container. Send backup." Only static answered. The metal walls were blocking his signal. Owen tried the latch from inside. It didn't budge. He pushed against the door with his shoulder. Nothing. It was solid, designed not to open from this side. He forced himself to stay calm. People knew where he was. When he didn't check in, they'd come looking. He just had to wait. But the cold was already seeping through his jacket. His hands were shaking. His feet were going numb. He couldn't wait, not in this temperature. Owen examined the space more carefully. The walls were solid metal. No weak points. The ceiling was the same. The floor. He knelt down, brushing away frost. There were seams here, too. Another panel. Hope surged through him. He found the edges and pulled. The floor panel lifted easily, revealing a space beneath. A crawl space, maybe, or access to the container's undercarriage. Owen aimed his flashlight down. It wasn't a crawl space, it was a room. Another hidden compartment. This one below the container. And it was bigger than should be possible. The space extended beyond the container's footprint, as if it somehow existed outside the normal dimensions. But that was impossible. Owen stared into the space, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The room below was furnished. He could see a table, chairs, a cot in the corner. Personal items scattered around. A jacket, a thermos, a radio, as if someone had been living down there. His flashlight caught movement. Owen jerked back, nearly dropping the light. Someone was in the room below. A figure, standing in the corner with its back to him. Wearing dark clothes, perfectly still. "Hello?" Owen called down. "Can you hear me?" The figure didn't respond. Didn't move. "I'm a border officer. You need to come up here. It's dangerous." Still nothing. Owen's mind raced. This was a smuggling operation. Had to be. Hidden compartments, false walls. Someone had been using this container to move people across the border. But why was it so cold? And why had it been abandoned? "I'm coming down," Owen said. He didn't want to. Every instinct told him to find another way out. But he needed answers. And if someone was trapped down there, possibly injured or hypothermic, he had an obligation to help. He lowered himself through the opening, his boots finding a metal ladder attached to the side. He climbed down carefully, his flashlight clenched between his teeth. The room was larger than it had appeared from above. Impossible large. Owen's flashlight beam couldn't find the far wall. The space just extended into darkness, much deeper than the container could possibly contain. The figure still stood in the corner, motionless. Owen approached it slowly, hand resting on his service weapon. "Border Services, I need you to turn around and identify yourself." The figure turned. It wasn't a person. Owen stumbled backward, his flashlight beam revealing what he'd mistaken for a human form. It was a frozen mass of condensation and ice, shaped vaguely like a human. The cold had formed it somehow, water crystallizing in the air and accumulating in this shape. But shapes like that didn't form naturally. Something had to create them, something had to stand there long enough for the ice to accumulate around it. Owen's light swept the room, and he saw more of them. Dozens of frozen shapes standing throughout the space, all facing the walls, all perfectly still. He backed toward the ladder, but his light caught something else. On the table, a document. Papers frozen together but still readable. Owen grabbed them, his fingers screaming in protest at the cold. He held them under his light. Shipping manifests. Multiple ones, dating back months. Different companies, different origin points, but all routed through this warehouse. All for containers that supposedly carried industrial equipment, and handwritten notes in the margins, recording what was actually in the containers. People. Dozens of people, smuggled in hidden compartments. But the last entry made Owen's blood freeze colder than the air around him. Container 4799B. Hidden compartment failed to maintain safe temperature. Refrigeration unit malfunction. All occupants lost. Recommend disposal of unit and contents. Owen looked at the frozen shapes around him. They weren't condensation formations. They were people. Frozen solid. Still standing in the positions they'd been in when the temperature dropped, when the cold had killed them faster than they could react. The compartment had been designed as a smuggling chamber. Climate-controlled, hidden from scans. But something had gone wrong. The temperature regulation had failed, reversed. The hidden space had become a freezer. And now Owen was standing in a mass grave. He ran for the ladder, documents forgotten. His hands found the rungs and he climbed, muscles screaming, lungs burning with frozen air. He reached the upper compartment and pulled himself through the floor panel. The door. He had to get through the door. Owen threw himself against it, hammering with his fists. "Help! Someone help me!" His radio crackled suddenly, a signal breaking through. "Troll 3. You, Pi? I'm trapped, in the container. Send." The voice cut off, but it had come through. They knew he was in trouble. Owen sank against the door, trying to conserve warmth. His whole body was shaking now, violent tremors he couldn't control. The cold was winning. He looked at the floor panel. It was still open, darkness visible below, and from that darkness he heard something. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming up the ladder. Owen's heart hammered. He scrambled away from the opening, pressing himself against the far wall. His flashlight beam found the opening just as a hand emerged, pale, covered in frost, fingers bent at wrong angles. The frozen form pulled itself up through the floor panel. What Owen had thought was an ice sculpture moved with terrible purpose. It stood in the compartment with him, water dripping from its frozen clothes, and turned its head toward him. Where its face should be was just smooth ice, but Owen could see the shape of features underneath. A person perfectly preserved in frozen death. It took a step toward him. Owen pressed against the wall, nowhere left to go. The thing moved closer, raising one frozen hand. Metal rang against metal. The door behind Owen swung open and hands grabbed him, pulling him backward into the main warehouse. "Got him! He's here!" Colette Mercier, the warehouse watchman, hauled Owen out of the container. Behind her stood Ambrose Keating, the rail inspector who'd been doing rounds in the area. Owen collapsed on the warehouse floor, gasping. He pointed at the container. "There's... inside there, people..." Colette and Ambrose exchanged glances. Ambrose climbed into the container with a flashlight, Colette following. Owen forced himself to stand, his legs barely supporting him. He stumbled to the container entrance. The hidden compartment door was closed, no sign it had ever been open. The floor panel was sealed shut. "There's nothing here," Ambrose called out. "Just boxes. What did you see?" "The hidden room, the frozen, they were down below." Colette emerged, shaking her head. "Owen, there's no hidden room, no false walls, just a standard container with boxes of equipment." "But I was in there." Ambrose checked the container floor. "Solid metal, no access panels. You sure you didn't hit your head or something?" Owen stared at the container. The seals were intact again, unbroken, as if he'd never entered it at all. The paramedics arrived and checked him for hypothermia. His core temperature was dangerously low, despite having only been in the container for minutes according to everyone else. But Owen's watch showed 45 minutes, nearly an hour of time that no one else remembered. They drove him to the hospital, treated him for cold exposure, and sent him home with orders to rest. Owen never returned to that warehouse. He put in for transfer to a different zone, citing health concerns. Request approved. But before he left, he did some research. Container 4799B, the number from the manifest he'd seen in the frozen room. He searched shipping records going back years. The container existed, had been in use for 5 years, running regular routes through the Great Lakes shipping network. Then, 8 months ago, it had been reported lost. Fallen overboard during a storm, sunk in deep water. But here was the strange part. 3 weeks after it was reported lost, Customs had logged it passing through this very warehouse. Sealed and unremarkable, carrying a shipment of industrial equipment that no one ever claimed. And the weight had been off. 2,000 kilos less than manifest. About the weight of 8 to 10 human bodies. Owen found reports of missing people. Migrants mostly. Desperate people willing to pay smugglers for passage across the border. 36 names over the course of 6 months, all last seen near border crossing points. All disappeared without a trace. The numbers matched. The timeline matched. Owen submitted his findings to the investigation unit. They thanked him for the information and promised to look into it. But when he checked back weeks later, the file had been closed. No evidence of smuggling operation. No evidence of modified containers. No evidence of anything. The warehouse was demolished 6 months later. Some kind of foundation issue, according to the official report. The ground underneath was unstable, unsafe for continued use. Owen thinks about that sometimes, about the cold room that existed below the container, about space that extended impossibly beyond normal dimensions, about how you'd build something like that, what you'd need to create a pocket of space that shouldn't exist, that existed between here and somewhere else, and about what happened when that space failed. When the temperature regulation broke down and that pocket filled with cold from wherever it connected to. Cold from somewhere that should never touch the living world. The frozen people are still there, he thinks. Still standing in that impossible space, still waiting for someone to find them. But no one will, because the space only opens sometimes, when the conditions are right. When someone looks in the right way, at the right angle, and sees what shouldn't be there. Owen sometimes wakes at night, convinced his bedroom is too cold. He checks the thermostat, normal temperature, but the feeling persists, and in his dreams he's back in the container, back in the cold room, and the frozen shapes are moving, turning to face him, their ice-covered features reflecting his flashlight beam. They're trying to tell him something, trying to warn him, but their mouths are frozen shut, and all that emerges is the sound of wind through ice, the sound of cold spaces opening where they shouldn't, the sound of death that comes from somewhere that isn't quite here, isn't quite anywhere. Colette Mercier retired early, 6 months after the incident. She told anyone who asked that it was health reasons. But she told Owen, in a brief phone call, what she'd really seen that day in the warehouse. When she'd entered the container to pull him out, she'd seen the hidden panel, seen it standing open, frost pouring from it like smoke, seen shapes moving in the darkness below. But when Ambrose had followed her in seconds later, it had all been gone. The panel sealed. The frost vanished. Just a normal container with normal boxes. She'd convinced herself it was a trick of the light, but she couldn't convince herself why her hands had been covered in frost, why her fingerprints had frozen to the metal door, why she'd needed treatment for frostbite on a November day when the temperature was barely below freezing. Owen thanked her for telling him, thanked her for pulling him out when she did, because he knows what would have happened if he'd stayed in that cold room any longer. He'd seen the frozen shapes for what they were. Dead people, yes, but not quite dead. Preserved in that impossible space, in that pocket between worlds. Still aware, still conscious, frozen but not freed, still standing there in the dark, waiting for the door to open again, waiting for someone to find them, waiting to be released from the cold that had claimed them. Owen carries a copy of the missing persons reports with him. 36 names. He reads them, sometimes, late at night, saying each name aloud. It's the least he can do. Bearing witness. Remembering because no one else will. The cases are closed. The warehouse is gone. The container is officially lost at sea, and somewhere, in a space that shouldn't exist, in a cold room that opens and closes according to rules no one understands, 36 people are still standing, still waiting, still frozen between life and death, in the dark beneath a container that doesn't exist, that was lost in water too deep to recover. But sometimes, late at night, shipping manifests appear in Owen's mailbox. Manifests for containers he doesn't recognize, listing weights that don't match their contents. He knows what they mean. More hidden compartments, more cold rooms, more people standing frozen in spaces that exist between here and nowhere. He doesn't investigate anymore. He can't. It's not his job anymore, but he keeps the manifests, adds them to his file, and counts the missing weight. 2,000 kilos, 4,000, 6. Each kilogram representing a life lost to the cold, a person standing forever in a room that shouldn't exist, and growing colder every year. The fog came in with the evening tide, rolling across the inlet like something alive. Niamh Calder had seen a lot of fog in her 3 years working this coastal station, but tonight's was different, thicker, more deliberate in the way it moved. She stood on the dock watching it swallow the water, the boats, the distant shoreline. Within minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 10 meters. The foghorn at the lighthouse started its lonely call, rhythmic and mournful. Niamh's radio crackled. "Station 2, this is Central. We're getting reports of a vessel approaching your position. No radio contact, no transponder signal." "Copy that. Can you give me a heading?" "Negative. Radar's not picking it up clearly. Just wanted you aware. I'll watch for it." Niamh walked to the edge of the dock, her boots echoing on the wet boards. The fog pressed around her, dampening sound, reducing the world to a small circle of gray-white mist. She could hear water lapping against the pilings, the distant cry of gulls, the creak of moored boats, but nothing approaching. She was about to head back inside when she heard it. An engine, low and steady, getting closer. Neve grabbed her flashlight and aimed it into the fog. The beam barely penetrated a few meters, reflecting back at her off the moisture-laden air. The engine sound grew louder. Then a shape emerged from the gray. A fishing boat, maybe 25 feet long. White hull with blue trim, single mast, cabin in the front. It was moving too fast for the conditions. No running lights, no one visible on deck. "Vessel approaching Station 2, Neve called out through her megaphone. "Cut your engine and prepare for inspection." The boat continued forward, not slowing. It was going to hit the dock. Neve jumped back as the boat's bow struck the pilings with a hollow thud. The impact should have thrown anyone on board forward, but no one appeared. No one called out. The engine continued to idle. Neve secured the boat with mooring lines, then climbed aboard carefully. The deck was wet with more than just fog. Seawater sloshed in the bottom, an inch or two of cold Pacific water. "Border services," she called out. "Anyone aboard?" Silence. Just the engine's rumble and the slosh of water. The cabin door was closed. Neve tried the handle, unlocked. She pushed it open and shone her flashlight inside. Empty. No one at the controls. No one in the small space behind the pilot's seat. But the engine was warm. Very warm. Someone had been running this boat recently, within the last few minutes. Neve checked the controls. The key was in the ignition, turned to the on position. The throttle was set to idle. Everything looked normal, as if the pilot had just stepped away for a moment. On the seat beside the wheel sat a logbook. Neve picked it up, flipping through the pages. Standard fishing entries, dates, locations, catch details. The handwriting was neat and consistent. The last entry was from today, 6:47 p.m., just over an hour ago. Heading in, weather turning, should make harbor by 7:30. But it was 8:15 now, and there was no one aboard. Neve examined the logbook more carefully. The last page had been torn out. Not neatly, ripped away, leaving a jagged edge. The page before showed the impression of whatever had been written on the missing sheet. She angled it under her flashlight, trying to read the indentations. She could make out fragments. Not right. In the water. Following us. The rest was too faint to read. Neve stepped back onto the deck and checked the boat thoroughly. Fishing gear was secured properly. Nets were folded and stowed. Ice chest contained a decent catch. Salmon, mostly. Everything indicated a normal fishing trip. Except for three things. First, the engine was warm, but the exhaust smelled wrong. Not like diesel fuel, more like salt water. As if the engine had been flooded and dried out, then run again. Second, the anchor was deployed. The line ran down into the water, taut and stretched. But they were at the dock. Why would the anchor be down at a dock? Third, the fishing nets. They were clean, too clean. No seaweed, no barnacles, no debris. Nets that had been in the water should have something clinging to them, but these looked like they'd been scrubbed, or like they'd been somewhere water doesn't grow things. Nave radioed Central. "Station 2. Vessel has arrived, but no crew aboard. Engine running appears to have been in use within the last hour. Requesting backup and identification of vessel. Copy, stand by." While she waited, Neve examined the boat's registration. The name was painted on the stern. June's Promise. Registration number matched the paperwork in the cabin. Owned by someone named Sylvan Rousseau. Commercial fishing license, home port 20 kilometers north at Tofino. The radio crackled. "Station 2, we've got information on that vessel. Registered to Sylvan Rousseau. He called in a distress signal this afternoon at 5:23 p.m. Said his engine was failing and he was taking on water. Coast Guard responded but couldn't locate him. Last GPS position was about 8 kilometers offshore." Neve looked at the engine, still idling smoothly. This engine's running fine. No signs of water damage except it smells like it was flooded. Copy. We're contacting the owner and sending Coast Guard to your position. Neve stepped off the boat back onto the dock. Something about the vessel made her skin crawl. It was too neat, too clean, like someone had prepared it for inspection, or like it had come from somewhere very far away. She walked around to examine the boat from different angles. That's when she noticed the water line. The boat sat too high. Way too high for a vessel that should be loaded with fuel, gear, and catch. It was riding like it was empty, like it weighed almost nothing, but she'd seen the ice chest full of fish, seen the gear and supplies. The boat should be sitting deeper. Neve climbed aboard again and checked the hold. Full of equipment, just as she'd seen. She hefted the ice chest. Heavy, probably 50 kilos of fish. But the boat still rode too high. She went back to the cabin and looked at the GPS unit. The screen was on, showing a route. She pressed the history button. The GPS showed the boat's path for the last 12 hours. Starting from Tofino at 4 a.m., heading out to the fishing grounds. Normal route, nothing unusual. Then, at 5:23 p.m., right when the distress call was made, the GPS track did something impossible. It jumped. Not a smooth movement, but an instant relocation. One moment, the boat was 8 kilometers offshore. The next, it was 40 kilometers south, then 20 kilometers east, then right back to the original position. The positions formed a pattern. A perfect triangle, each point about 30 kilometers from the others. The boat had somehow been in 3 places at once, or moved between them so fast the GPS couldn't track it properly. Then the track went blank for 37 minutes. When it resumed, the boat was here, at the dock, as if it had simply appeared. Neve's hands were shaking slightly as she photographed the GPS screen. This wasn't right. None of this was right. She heard footsteps on the dock. June Callister, the skiff pilot who worked the inlet, approached through the fog. "Hey, Neve, that's Sylvan's boat, isn't it? He okay?" "He's not aboard. You seen him today?" June frowned, coming closer. "Yeah, actually. Saw him heading out this morning. He waved. Seemed fine." She peered at the boat. "That's strange." "What is?" "The nets. They're clean." "I noticed that too." "No, I mean really clean. Sylvan never cleans his nets like that. Says the smell attracts fish." June climbed aboard and examined the nets more closely. "These look brand new, but I know he was using old ones. I sold them to him myself 2 years ago." Neve watched June handle the nets. Could he have replaced them? "Not without me knowing. I'm the only supply within 50 kilometers. June's expression darkened. "These aren't his nets. Then whose are they?" "I don't know, but they weren't made around here. Look at the weave." Neve looked. The nets were woven in a pattern she didn't recognize. Tight, intricate, more like fabric than typical fishing net. "And another thing," June continued, pointing at the water in the bottom of the boat. "This isn't seawater." "What do you mean?" "Taste it." Neve dipped her finger in the water and touched it to her tongue, then quickly spat. "That's fresh water." "Exactly. We're in a saltwater inlet. The boat should have seawater in the bottom if it took a wave or leak, but this is fresh. Clean, fresh water. Almost like... Like what?" June was quiet for a moment. "Like rain. Or condensation. Like water that came from somewhere it shouldn't come from." Neve's radio crackled. "Station 2, we've made contact with Sylvan Rousseau." Neve grabbed the handset. "He's all right? He's at home. Has been since this morning. Says he never took the boat out today." That's impossible. Someone radioed a distress call from this vessel. He's very clear about it. His boat's been at his dock all day. He's looking at it right now. Niamh felt cold that had nothing to do with the fog. Central, I'm standing on Sylvain Rousseau's boat. Registration matches. Name on the stern matches. It's his boat. A long pause. Stand by. Niamh looked at June. The skiff pilot's face had gone pale. This happened before, June said quietly. 3 years ago. A boat came in through the fog, just like this. Empty. Engine running. The owner swore the boat was still at his dock, but we were standing on it. What happened? Coast Guard investigated. They determined it was a hoax. Someone had repainted a different boat to look like the registered one, but June touched the hull. I knew that boat, had worked on it myself. It was real, it was the actual boat, but it was also still at the home dock. That's impossible. Yeah, that's what everyone said. June looked up at Niamh. They found the owner dead 2 weeks later. Heart attack, official report said. But I saw him the day before. He was terrified. Said the boat kept coming back, kept arriving at different docks, empty, while the real boat sat at home. The radio crackled again. Station 2, we're sending a team to verify. In the meantime, secure the vessel and don't let anyone else board. Copy. But Niamh's attention was caught by something else. The logbook, still sitting on the cabin seat. It was open to a different page now. She was certain she'd closed it. She picked it up. A new entry had appeared on the previously blank page. Fresh ink, still slightly wet. 8:47 p.m. Made it to Station 2. But Sylvain's still at home. We're still at sea. Both true, both real, don't understand. The fog took us somewhere, brought us back wrong. Below that, in shakier handwriting, if you're reading this, don't try to find us. We're not where we were, we're not where we should be. We're in the between place, where the fog keeps what it catches. Niamh dropped the logbook. She backed out of the cabin, nearly tripping on the deck. June caught her arm. What is it? The logbook. Someone's writing in it right now. June grabbed the book and looked. Her face went white. This is Sylvain's handwriting. I've seen his logs before. This is him. But he's at home. Part of him is. June closed the logbook carefully. But part of him is still out there, where the boat went, where the fog took it. The fog seemed to press closer, thicker. The foghorn sounded again, mournful and distant. We need to get off this boat, Niamh said. They climbed onto the dock just as the Coast Guard vessel emerged from the fog. 2 officers boarded June's Promise, inspecting it thoroughly. While they worked, Niamh pulled up the registration data on her tablet. Sylvain Rousseau, age 47, commercial fisherman. Licensed and bonded, 23 years of clean records. And then she found something. A note in the system, flagged years ago but never resolved. 3 years ago, Sylvain had reported his boat missing, filed a theft report. But the boat had been found the next day, still at his dock, exactly where it should be. The report was dismissed as a mistake, but Sylvain had insisted, said the boat had been gone, said something had taken it during the fog and brought back something else, something that looked like his boat but wasn't quite right. He'd withdrawn the report after pressure from the fishing company. Bad for business to claim your boat was haunted or cursed. The Coast Guard officers called Niamh over. We've cleared the vessel, no signs of foul play, engines in good condition, catches fresh, everything normal except no crew. What about the GPS track? Shows a standard fishing route, nothing unusual. Niamh climbed back aboard and checked the GPS. The history was gone. The impossible triangle of positions had vanished. Now it showed only a simple, straight path from Tofino to here. But she had photographs. She pulled out her phone. The photos were blank. Just gray screens, as if the camera had malfunctioned. She checked the logbook. The mysterious entries were gone. Just the original fishing logs, ending with the 6:47 p.m. note about heading home. "Did you see the entries?" Neve asked June. "In the logbook? About the fog?" June nodded slowly. "I saw them. They're gone now." "Yeah, they do that. Whatever comes back through the fog, it doesn't stay the same. It changes, corrects itself, tries to match what it's supposed to be." The Coast Guard decided to impound the boat for investigation. They started the process of moving it to their facility, but when they tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. Completely dead. The same engine that had been running smoothly minutes before. They checked the fuel. The tank was empty. Bone dry. But Neve had seen the gauge. It had shown 3/4 full. They called a tow to move the boat. While they waited, Neve went back to the cabin one more time. Something was bothering her. The ice chest. She opened it. Empty. No fish. No ice. Just bare metal. But she'd seen the fish, had watched the Coast Guard officers confirm the catch. She grabbed one of the officers. "Where's the catch? The salmon." He looked at her confused. "What catch? Boat was empty when we boarded." "No, there were fish. 50 kilos at least. Ma'am, the hold is empty. Always has been." Neve opened every compartment, every storage space, all empty. The fishing gear was gone. The supplies were gone. Even the nets June had examined had vanished. The boat was hollow, a shell, nothing but an empty hull. June found her sitting on the dock an hour later, after the boat had been towed away. "You okay?" "I don't know what I saw, what was real. All of it was real, and none of it was." June sat beside her. "The fog does that, takes things, brings them back wrong. Sometimes it takes people. Where does it take them? Somewhere else. Somewhere that's here but not here. Between places." June looked out at the fog-shrouded water. "I think Sylvan went there 3 years ago. Not all of him, just enough. Enough that part of him is still out there, still fishing, still trying to come home. But he's at his house right now. Part of him is, but the part that went into the fog, it's still there. Still casting nets in water that doesn't exist. Still bringing in catches from nowhere. Still trying to dock at stations that are in both places at once." Neve thought about the logbook entries. The desperate words were in the between place. How do we get him back? We don't. Once the fog takes you to that place, you're always there. Even when you're here, you're split, existing in both spaces. June stood up. "That's why they found the other guy dead. Heart attack, they said. But I think it was the split, the strain of being in two places at once. Eventually, it pulls you apart." They stood in silence, watching the fog. Somewhere out there, Sylvain Rousseau was fishing. Part of him was home, safe, insisting he'd never left. Part of him was in his boat, casting nets into water that wasn't quite water, bringing in catches that weren't quite real. Both versions true. Both versions real. And every time the fog came in thick, the boat would arrive somewhere. Empty but running. Clean but used. Real but impossible. A ghost ship piloted by a man who was still alive. Still fishing in the space between here and there. Neve filed her report. Coast Guard filed theirs. Official conclusion: abandoned vessel, owner located in safe, no crime committed, case closed. But Neve kept the photographs, even though they were blank. Kept her notes about the impossible GPS track, the fresh water in a saltwater boat, the catch that vanished. Because a week later, June's promise appeared again, this time at a dock 40 kilometers north. Empty, engine running, nets clean, and Sylvain Rousseau was at home, swearing his boat had never left the dock. It happened again a month later. And 2 months after that. Always when the fog came in thick. Always arriving empty but showing signs of recent use. Always at a different location. The Coast Guard stopped responding. Called it a recurring hoax. Said someone must be moving the boat as a prank. But June knows better, and Neve knows better, because they've both seen it. The way the boat sits too high in the water. The way the nets are too clean. The way everything about it is right and wrong at the same time. The way it exists in both places at once, here and there, real and impossible. And sometimes, on very foggy nights, Neve stands on the dock and listens. Past the foghorn, past the gulls, past the lap of water on wood. She hears an engine, low and steady, getting closer. And she wonders if tonight will be the night the boat arrives and Sylvain is aboard. Finally complete. Finally whole. Or if he'll remain forever split, part of him at home, part of him in that between place, fishing in fog that never lifts, bringing in catches from water that doesn't exist, trying to dock at harbors that exist in both worlds and neither. She wonders what it's like, being pulled apart like that, existing in multiple spaces at once. She wonders if he even knows, if the part of him at home remembers the part that's still out there. Or if the split is so complete that neither half knows about the other. Two versions of one man, both real, both alive, both trying to live lives that can never quite connect. June says it's only a matter of time. Eventually, the split will be too much. Sylvain will die. The version at home will simply stop working, like a machine that's been running too long. And when he does, the boat will stop appearing. It will stay in that between place, part of the fog forever. Crewed by a man who's gone but not quite gone. Just like all the others. All the boats that vanished over the years. All the fishermen who were found safe at home while their vessels arrived empty at distant docks. All of them still out there. Still fishing. Still trying to come home. Still existing in the fog that never lifts. In the water that's not quite water. In the place that's between here and everywhere else. Neve transferred to an inland station 6 months later. Couldn't take the fog anymore. Couldn't take the waiting for boats that shouldn't arrive. Couldn't take the knowledge that somewhere, in space that exists between spaces, people were trapped. Living and dying at the same time. Here and there. Real and impossible. But even inland, hundreds of kilometers from the coast, she sometimes wakes at night and hears it. An engine, low and steady, getting closer. And she knows somewhere a boat is arriving, empty but running, clean but used, piloted by no one and everyone, carrying nothing and everything, coming home but never quite arriving, forever caught in the fog, forever in the between place, forever split between the world that is and the world that might be, and on its stern, a name painted in letters that exist in both places at once, June's promise. A promise that was made, a promise that was kept, a promise that will never be fulfilled.